Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hello, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you today, Ken?
Exceptionally well. Hope you are well too, Rory, and I hope that you are well listening to this. You've joined us for episode 164 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast. We have got 3 sections that we're going to be covering today. Our student check-in, where we kind of speak about something that students on a formal counselling course may be experiencing at the moment, and we're going to be speaking about practicing skills in an online training environment, very much of this moment. And then we move on to the Counselling Digital Revolution, where we recognize how counselling, psychotherapy, the delivery thereof, how clients engage in that is changing through the use of technology. And today we're going to be looking at contracting when working online, the difference between face-to-face and online contracting. And we close today's episode with Practice Matters, where we dip our toe into the pool of practice and we speak about what we may come across in our practices. And today, Nicola Hughes, a specialist and one of our lecturers, is going to be speaking about how bereavement and loss can affect children. So hopefully something there for everybody. It's our smorgasbord, Rory, of today's episode, starting off with our student check-in. Why would a student be practicing skills in an online training environment, Rory?
Let me have a think. Well, at the time of recording this, which is in September of 2020, it would have escaped no one's notice that we're still in the midst of a pandemic. And as people are going back to college and university, it's becoming apparent that a lot of training delivery is going to be online. And part of that is, of course, skills. And I think that actually, if you are student who's working online, who's learning online, I think it's an excellent preparation for maybe the type of counselling you'll be doing, which may be online. Online counselling, the digital revolution, as we refer to it, is now here to stay. It's not going to go away. And I think at the very best, we'll have a blended economy, maybe some face-to-face, maybe some online. But specifically, if you're working online, there are some things that you can do to make your skills practice online, I think, a lot better. And I think the first thing I would say is sound. It's really important that if you're working, maybe you're being split into groups by your tutor. If you're using Teams or Zoom, you can do little breakout rooms, is to make sure you've got a reasonably good pair of headphones so that you can actually hear what's going on. I think that you have to remember that if you are doing skills, you're going to be attenuated by the computer you're using, the device you're using, and also the fact that you're going across the internet. So a good pair of headphones. Ken and myself are wearing a pair of headphones as we record this, and it really helps us hear each other a lot better. The other thing I would say is try practicing skills that may be useful for where you may be going in terms of your practice. So how about this one? Turn off your webcam.
Oh.
And partner up, turn off your webcam and practice skills just using the voice, no visual cues. And if you're going to be doing telephone counselling, it's just an excellent preparation because you can actually listen, I think, more attentively if you're not distracted by the visuals of somebody. So, when I was training, I used to get people to turn their chairs back to back and practice the skills so they couldn't see each other. And the difference was phenomenal. People said that, first of all, it was a lot more difficult to get into the mindset of just hearing the voice. But also, once they got past that, they said that they could actually hear the person a lot better. They were focusing purely on what was being said, not being distracted. So I think that's something to really, really consider. If you are doing skills, and I know some tutors listen to this, thank you very much. That might be a little training tip to get the students to turn off the webcams and try to do their skills without any visual clues. A bit of a challenge, but could be very useful.
Yeah, and we recognise that challenge. If you're on a formal counselling course at the moment, chances are you may be doing part of your skills practice online. And it's challenging. It is challenging. It's challenging for a qualified therapist who's maybe been in face-to-face therapy for some years to move to online and transfer the skills, because there is a filter of technology that sits between you and the client. We have to acknowledge that, and I guess we have to take that into consideration when we're working with our skills. However, if you take the basic counselling skills and break them down, they remain the same. So a reflection is a reflection, a paraphrase is a paraphrase, an inquiring question to understand from the client's perspective still remains an inquiring question. So the skills themselves remain the same. Perhaps maybe with a little bit of a difference on the use of silence. And I say this because specifically on telephone, as you've just mentioned, Rory, silence becomes a little bit more tricky, and it can bring things up for you. And it's usually an idea, maybe if working with silence is such a powerful skill, it just is, to just let the person know at the beginning of the session, kind of when you're contracting for that session, to say, there are times where I will remain silent, and I do this so that you can process what you're thinking about. You see, in the face-to-face, the client can see you and they can see that you're being silent. On the telephone, they might think you're gone. So you just put that in so that you can use that skill if required. And you're 100% correct, Rory, in that you do lose the visual clues, and that is a challenge, because we pick up the visual clues even if subconsciously we're reading visual clues. And if you look at communication, so much of our communication, a larger percentage than is verbal, is transmitted via our body language, how we have our eyes, how we tilt our head, what we're doing with our hands. So many of those things lost if you're working online. However, there is so much that can be gained from truly listening to the voice. And I think this is an opportunity for that truly active listening, where you're listening to the breath of the person, you're listening to the pace of their words, you're listening to the pronunciation, you're listening to the whether their voice goes up or goes down as they're speaking. There's so much that can be gained from that. And of course, there are many therapists, successful therapists with great client outcomes, who are visually impaired, and they have practiced the whole of their practice without those visual clues. I like your suggestion there, Rory, of turning off the webcam. Some technology that you can use practicing your skills. One great piece of technology, which is free to use, is a little program called Zoom. In this time of pandemic, as you said, if you haven't heard about Zoom, you've maybe been under a rock, because it's very well publicized and a lot of people using it. And what Zoom is good at is recording. You can get together with someone and there's a little record button that you can press, which will record your skill session, which is great for looking back and evaluating it. So there are some positives there. And if you can get yourself a copy of the CAR-CUF rating scales, you can evaluate your own skills by kind of playing that back, playing the recording back, maybe exporting that as a sound file, pop it on your mobile phone, and rate yourself against those CAR-CUF rating scales.
Yeah, and here's a little interesting exercise that was developed by our good friend Mick Cooper. Is get yourself a piece of paper and put a line in it and go from 1 to 10. So you draw a line horizontally across a piece of paper, 1 at the left-hand side, 10 at the other, and then just draw down on the x-axis, say 5 minutes. Each of you has one of those pieces of paper, and then when you are communicating and using counselling skills, both the person who's in the role of the therapist and the person who's in the role of the client go up the 1 to 10 scale and just rate how you connected. So, if you think you're really connected with the person, just draw 10. And then the next minute, if it's 9, just draw 9. And at the end of the exercise, just compare notes and see exactly where you think empathy is and how much empathy that you've received or you've given. And it's a really good exercise. It's called an empathy exercise. And it just shows the difference between transmitted empathy, how people think they're being empathic, and how it's received. very useful exercise. Used to use that in class many years ago.
Yeah, I like that. I can see qualified therapists writing that down. Oh, that's a good idea. I'll try that. It's really, really good information there. One of the things that is really effective in training is what's called counselling in a fishbowl, and that is an exercise where one person will be the speaker, the other person will be the listener, and the rest of the peers will kind of sit around and watch that exchange take place, and then feedback can be given afterwards on how that was perceived. And that is really, really useful, and it's useful for a number of reasons. Number one, if you're just a participant watching this happen, you get to see different styles of skills being used, which can inform how you use skills. You might see someone use a method or a technique or just a way of delivering skills where you go, oh, I like that. I might adapt that. I know I certainly did within my training. The thought is that kind of, and of course the other benefit is if you are the speaker or the listener in that, you get some feedback on your skills, which is really helpful. You've got some constructive feedback that you can build on. One of the thoughts is, how do you do counselling in a fishbowl over something like Zoom? And it can be done. And the nice thing about Zoom is you can have a number of people that come together. You can have a meeting with 5 people or 6 people. And this is a message, I guess, for tutors as well as students, is to try and organize group meetups to work on your skills, so that it's not just the two of you there, and that you can have that feedback, maybe even a tutor observing skills, and the observers can turn off their webcams, and that you can't do that in a live situation. In a live situation, you're on one chair, the other person's on the other chair, and everyone's sat watching you. You can see them, but you can actually turn off the webcams. So there is another top training tip for practicing your skills online.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one final observation, which is good practice in online therapy anyway, is if you are working with someone and their face is they're in shade, so you can't see their face. They may have their back to a window, so the window is really bright, but they're in a silhouette. Just ask them to reposition themselves so that you can see their face. And I think that's quite important. You might have to be thoughtful of that if you're counselling clients, because they may be sitting in shadow for a reason. But try and make sure that when you set yourself up, that you can be seen. I'm looking at Ken across the monitor here, and he's beautifully lit. You're beautifully lit today, Ken.
Oh, thank you. I'm blushing now with your compliments, Rory.
He is. He's gone red, but I can see all the intonations in his face. And I think that's really useful. And I think these micro skills, just watching the facial expression, just the intonation of someone's voice, are just so useful. And I want to share just a little bit of research that was done on this. And it's not actually from therapy. It comes from a 1960s presidential election between John Kennedy and Nixon. And what happened was, it was the first televised presidential interview. We're quite used to those now on the TV. And the people who listened on the radio thought that Nixon was more articulate, and the people who watched on the TV thought Kennedy was more articulate. Ooh. And it just goes to prove that when you take away the visual side of things, that actually what someone's saying can take on a whole new life. And I think that's sometimes missed. I think colleagues who may be sight impaired or blind probably know this instinctively because they live with this. But I think it's a really good skill to practice your skills not looking at somebody, because I think it really does sharpen up your listening. You're really focused on every aspect of what they're saying.
Yeah, it becomes precious, the words, the pauses, the intonation, the tone, all of that. It really does, I guess, bring a new meaning or a new level of meaning to active listening. It's super active listening. So as we move away from this, I want to share that this student check-in is sponsored by the Counselling Study Resource. Now, Counselling Study Resource is our library for students, and it's packed with lectures and resources for students that are mapped to the the criteria of the United Kingdom awarding body. So if you're on a course in the United Kingdom, we've got your course covered kind of in lectures and in the resources within the Counselling Study resource. But what I really wanted to focus on today is we have got a superb skills section, absolutely superb, where the skills are broken down into all the individual skills: silence, working with metaphor, so the more advanced skills; immediacy, so the skills that some people kind of struggle with or struggle to get grips with. And they're really in detail. It's all the information that you need to know. So it kind of walks you through what the skill is, what the definition of the skill is. So if you're writing up an assignment, you're going to need to kind of say what that skill is. And then it kind of walks through what that skill does for the client, what that skill does for the therapist, how it's being used, and what kind of difference that can make. And we've also got, and this is really useful at a time like this, audio examples of those skills being used in a simulated session. So it's a recording of that, and you can hear the skills being used, because we seldom get a guest to hear a qualified counsellor using skills. Well, there's the opportunity in Counselling Study Resource. And again, once within those recorded sessions, the skills are then evaluated again of what was that skill, what did it do for the client, what did it do for the counsellor. So if you're interested in Counselling Study Resource, you can find out more information on that at counsellingtutor.com. And I can share that we have a great discount. It's not really a discount, it's a concession. We've really cut our prices down to help at this difficult time, because we know a lot of courses are doing remote learning, so this might be something that you can use to kind of underpin and take the stress out of your studies. We'll move away from our student check-in straight into the Counselling Digital Revolution. And today we're going to be speaking about contracting when working online. So without any further ado, let's get right into it.
Digital Counselling Revolution.
Well, how things have changed. I can remember when I graduated my course, which was in the sunny August of 2004, that our module on contracting was basically just verbally tell the client the limits of confidentiality and basically crack on with the counselling. And of course, through the years, the professions become more professional, more thoughtful, and it's not unusual for those who are doing face-to-face counselling to have written contracts nowadays. It's really good practice to have a written contract. And it takes on a whole new meaning when you're working online, because for those people who've done an online training course, they'll know that there are certain areas of contracting that are really, really important. And I'll give you an example of one of those. You're working with a client and they are on their own, they're living on their own. What happens if that client becomes ill in the middle of the session and you're 20 miles away? What do you do? And that is a specific area of contracting. And actually, this topic came up as a question in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, if you go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, all one word, and you'll find us. We're a closed group, but we're friendly. Knock on the door. We're going to let you in. Thousands and thousands of like-minded people, students who study in counselling, some supervisors, a smattering of tutors, and of course a lot of qualified colleagues and friends. Come in, join the conversation. And this came up. And someone said, is it right that you would call the emergency services if a client became ill and collapsed and sent someone to their home? Wouldn't this be a breach of confidentiality? Well, if you've contracted for it, then if you've contracted for it, the client's agreed on that, then that is absolutely right and proper. And if you think about it, the client's home is an extension of your therapy practice. If a client were to collapse and you were doing face-to-face work, presumably you'd call 999 if they were very ill. Presumably you might get help if you're working in an agency and some form of support to help this client who's become incapacitated. But if you're working online, you have to have a plan in place. And this is one of the many areas of contracting that is unique for online therapy.
So, if you're face to face, like you say, somebody has a heart attack, a stroke, collapses in the session, what are you going to do? You're going to get them medical attention, and not possible if you're working remotely. So you're 100% right there, Rory, and you need to know where to send people through to, but you wouldn't normally maybe need a client's address. So there are differences. In fact, there are quite a few differences in online contracting versus face-to-face contracting. And I'm going to kind of just go through some bullet points of what you might include in an online therapy agreement. So you'd have kind of a welcome, which you would probably have in your initial contract, saying who you are and what it is that you do, the modality that you work to. That would be standard in a counselling contract, so that the client is informed of your way of working, so they can make an informed decision of whether that's a fit for them. Then you would go into what the benefits and challenges of online therapy are. Now, we covered this in great detail in podcast episode 160. So if you haven't listened to that, do yourself a favor and go and have a listen to benefits and challenges of online therapy in episode 160. And that's not the benefits and challenges to us as therapists. That is from the client's perspectives. What are the benefits to them, but also what are the challenges that they may come across within their therapy. And it's important that we kind of lay that out for them before they engage in therapy. We've trained with therapists. We understand how it all works. Clients don't. They're coming in. It is our job to give them that information. Then technical instructions. Now, you would never have technical instructions in your face-to-face therapy contract. You wouldn't say to them, you walk in through the door and you sit in the chair over there. It's just not needed. But when working online, you're working with technology. We cannot assume that our clients know the technology. They may need instructions, and that's something that you may include in your contract. What tools you are using. If you're using Zoom, you would mention that. If you're using a telephone, you would mention that as well. Obviously, maybe wouldn't have to go so deep into the technical instructions for that. Then troubleshooting. So things online go wrong. You can lose connection with somebody. What do they do if they lose connection with you? What do they do if they have a bad reception? What do they do if their mobile phone battery runs out and dies, or they lose signal? What do they do if their internet connection drops? What do they do if their computer suddenly decides to do an update and they're connecting via that? So that kind of troubleshooting would be covered beforehand within your contract, so that if that came about within the session, your client would have the information they needed. Privacy. Now, I'm going to stop here and I'm going to hand over to you, Roy, because when we're talking about privacy and confidentiality, we understand what that looks like in a face-to-face situation, and we would say what the limits of confidentiality may be, which of course you would do in an online therapy, but it extends further because of dun 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 dun, the big GDPR.
Oh, that's that. The big GDPR, yes. So for those of you who are wondering what the big GDPR is,
with the music interlude, of course,
with the music interlude, absolutely, yes. is that's general data protection regulations. And if you were listening to this, maybe in a country other than the UK, that would be your local data protection laws. We call it general data protection regulations here in the UK, and of course that's around making sure that your client understands how long you'll keep their data for, how long, how they can access, because clients have the legal right in the UK to access their notes, how long you keep them for, how they're stored, and also, I think very importantly, a contract around the fact that you're using third-party software. We are, as we speak, in the hands of Zoom. We're using the Zoom software to record this podcast because Ken is 40 miles away, so we're working on a video link. And a disclaimer is part of the contracting, where you would say you would ask the client to consider that you're using third-party software. You do your due diligence. You're happy that it's secure and fit for purpose, but ultimately, if there is a data breach, the client needs to make a decision on that. I guess it's effectively you're using a room that's owned by somebody else, and hopefully that's a secure room. I'm sure it is. We've never had any difficulty with the platform we use. But again, it's about giving the client the information. Mm-hmm. These are the sorts of things that you wouldn't usually do if it was face-to-face. But the online world has brought just so much more that we have to do. And I know that for some therapists, it's there's just so much more contracting.
Yep.
And the fact of the matter, it is.
Yeah, and when we look at what a contract's purpose is, it is to outline what is on offer, so that it is fully understandable by the client. But it is also to protect ourselves, our clients, and our practice, and to kind of cover all the details and eventualities. So we kind of project forward what may come up, and we cover that in a contract, so that we're not going back after the fact and saying, "Oh, sorry, it looks like Zoom got hacked." It didn't, by the way. No, if you're listening to this, it didn't. I'm using this only as an example. Disclaimer. I can see the legal documents coming through the door as we speak, Rory. And my details have gone out. How come you didn't protect me about that? And you can find yourself kind of under the spotlight for that. So, and here's the thing: it's tricky, and this is why if you're working online, you need to train for it. You need to do the additional training for working online, because it's tricky in that even if you go, "Oh, well, I'm not really working online, I'm just speaking to them on the telephone," it's the same thing. There is still a digital footprint. There is a digital footprint. If you're using a mobile phone to contact a client, there is a footprint of their data, who they are, their number. If you're just sending an email to set something up, you're holding data. And GDPR, it's, as Rory said, it's a European law. It's General Data Protection Regulation, and the key here is regulation. It's a regulation. It's not a nice to have. It is a law. We have to follow it. We don't have a choice of following it or not. And as you know, the law suggests that ignorance of the law is not a defense.
No.
And it needs to be covered if in a contract if you are working online. There's legal, ethical considerations. There's location to contend with. We cannot assume where the client is, because if a client comes to your therapy room, you know exactly where they are. They're based in your therapy room. But if you're meeting them on a telephone, or you meeting them over a video platform, all you see is a postcard, a passport. Sorry, I don't know where postcards are coming from. I'm on holiday. That's what it is. It's a passport photo, really, of that person. They could be anywhere in the world. And if they're not in your jurisdiction, they're in a different country that has different laws, well, that creates issues of itself, because whose laws are you working to? The laws of your laws within your country, their laws in their country. So location is covered as well. And of course, training, supervision, and their informed consent, which is part of any client contract. And how do you get their informed consent? Well, there are digital signature applications that you can use. Most of the good ones require a payment, and that's part, I guess, of part of the price of running a practice. You don't have to buy a room or hire a room, but you do have to have the right tools, the right firewalls and protection to protect your own computer, and of course things like digital e-signature apps and software as well. It's a heavy lift, isn't it? The online contracting.
Yes, it is a completely step change from face-to-face work. But it's, as you say, Ken, it's absolutely essential. Because it's a different environment, and there are lots of other things a therapist has to take on board, which is why training is essential. It is completely different to working face to face, because you're managing a lot of other variables within your practice that never existed in face to face work.
100%. This section is sponsored. Counselling Digital Revolution is sponsored by So that's the Counselling Tutor online and telephone counselling course. We have a comprehensive course. It's 80 hours of training. It's actually more than 80 hours, but it's when you've done all the work that kind of walks you through all of that we're speaking about at the moment, giving you contract guidance, training, examples of contracts. We are a ACTO approved training provider. Our course carries the National Counselling Society. What is it? The exact wording, Rory? I can never remember. It is the
well. I've got the certificate on my wall in the studio here, and it's a quality checked course.
It's a quality check course by the National Counselling Society, NCS. And if you're interested in studying online and telephone counselling, you can check out our course, CounsellingTutor.com. As we move away from the digital revolution, we move into Practice Matters, where we're going to be speaking about how bereavement and loss can affect children.
Practice Matters.
Yes, and I think this is a very sensitive area. Bereavement is difficult at the best of times, but if the children involved, one has to be very, very sensitive. And I think that specific training around working with children and loss is absolutely essential. If you're working with children, or even, if you have any other kind of care for children, it could be your own children, or it could be that you're in an occupation where you care for children. Making sure that you get really, really good training around working with loss and bereavement in a child's world is so important. And we were so fortunate to have Nicola Hughes, a practitioner who knows a huge amount about bereavement and loss, and especially when it comes to children. She has recorded a lecture for the Counsellor CPD library. And this is what she had to say about child loss.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And this isn't the first lecture you've done. You've done another lecture on bereavement as well.
Yes, I have. Yes, really enjoying working with you guys at Counselling Tutor.
Yeah, so you're becoming quite a regular. I know the audience really love your work, and I think one of the things to really consider when you're working with children is it isn't the same as working with adults. Children have a less understanding of the world because they've just not lived in the world as long.
Yes.
So one of the things you talk about in your lecture is euphemisms.
Yes. You said it well. I can never say the words. Yeah, so we don't say my uncle died, we say he's passed away, or we find another word for it, or we've sadly lost my mum. And some of these words can be really confusing for children to hear. If something's lost, it can be found. We just need to be really mindful of the words we use around children and those with learning difficulties as well.
Yes, absolutely. And you've given us a list of euphemisms: popped his clogs, pushing up daisies, kicked the bucket, brown bread.
Brown bread dead. Cockney slang.
Cockney rhyming slang, which for those of you who are listening internationally is a patois that you would hear maybe in London. I don't possibly think you'd hear it so much now, but it's known in the UK as Cockney rhyming slang. Cockney rhyming slang. And also you've got to be very thoughtful of children's faith positions. You've used the term through the pearly gates.
Yes, yeah. Which is your favourite term on there, or which term do you tend to use in your area? Because I think there's some differences in cultures and areas of the UK. What do you use?
Yeah, absolutely. And you've also mentioned the word asleep. And I guess if someone's asleep, then a child might think they may wake up.
Yes, yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So avoiding euphemisms at all times. When you're working with children, how would you frame the death of someone? How would you actually say that to them?
So if I had to tell my child, for example, that somebody had died, how would I do that? I would just say that something really sad's happened and grandma's died. And wait for a response. And is it an emotional response? Is it they want information? How, when, what happened? But, generally, a lot of time people don't just die, that they get poorly. And so there's an explanation. There's And it's also age dependent. A 2 to 5 year old's not really going to understand. Their understanding's going to need adding to as the years go by, whereas a 5 to 9 year old or a teenager will totally understand death. The concept is concrete by then. So it's very individual.
Yes, I mean, I think that's a really important point, isn't it? Because children's understanding of the world, their cognitive development, their phenomenological kind of experience in the world develops as they develop through life. And I think you make a really good point of having to maybe revisit it as children get older, because it may be in a few years they say, "Tell me what happened to Granny," in which case then you've got to, I guess, respond.
Yes. And they're ready for more information, so they don't need everything. They don't need to know all the details like we adults do. You can really simplify things with them, and then when they're ready, you'll find, they'll do a lesson at school, or they'll see something on the TV and something will connect, and they'll ask you again, and you're like, okay, they're ready for the next sort of level of information here. Yeah. But obviously we've got to remember that if children are grieving, then usually the families are grieving too, and that's the real challenge for families to. Yeah, how do we do that without falling apart, without getting really sad? How do I be there for my child?
Absolutely. And I was absolutely stunned about a statistic that you brought up in the lecture. And I'm going to read it off the slide. A parent of children under 18 dies every 22 minutes in the UK. That is an absolutely stunning statistic.
Yeah. And I don't want to believe it. And partly I when you say that, I think, did I get that right? And I did get that right because it's from a trusted site. But when you think of schools that and how many children are affected in just one small school, that is one a class.
Yeah. So if we are working with children, it's almost certainly that at some point we're going to, I know as a school counsellor, I met many young people who'd lost one parent, or sadly in some cases 2 parents. Yes. It's a reality of child therapy, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of the things that I think sometimes isn't really discussed, and I think we've kind of already kind of set the ground for this, where we talk about children being in a developmental situation. Is the fact that children who have experienced the death of a parent, sibling or friend are likely to have continued issues more likely than appears in serious illnesses, mental illness, excluded from school, looked after by the local authority, drink alcohol, smoke cannabis at least once a month, or difficult behaviour such as staying out late or truanting from school. Yeah. That's quite a stunning and very sad observation, really, isn't it?
It really is. And I hope that's not the children that get the support. I hope that we can change that by giving good therapeutic support. And my passion really is helping parents. I believe that if we help support the parents, then we don't necessarily need to provide the psychological intervention with the child. So I would see a lot of cases and assess families and realise that if the parent could just be a good enough grieving parent, then their child would be okay. They didn't necessarily. I think for children to have relationships with counsellors when they're really little, especially the 5-6 year old, that's asking quite a lot of them. So if we can support parents, unfortunately school counsellors are there for the children, and the project I worked for was there for the children. So I really feel for parents. They don't really get the support. They need some sort of consultation or guidance, which is why I deliver this training and talk about it and promote it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there is something to be said about how parents grieve themselves and how they support each other. As someone who is 63 I'm nearly 63 at the time of recording this, we were brought up to be rather stoic about death. Yeah. And looking across my life, I absolutely know that is not the right way to address it, because children need some guidance, and I use the word leadership, I guess, when it comes when it comes to what grief is and what's, it's okay to feel as you feel.
Yeah. Well, we model how to live. So we put our shoes on, and our 2-3-year-old learns how to put their shoes on. And, young children always role playing and pretending. And so grief is no different. And what happens is parents grieve at night time, or they grieve when the child's at school. And this child isn't seeing an emotional response to their grandma or granddad dying. And so, but they need to, but they don't know how to do it because we as adults don't do it very well.
Yes, and it comes into the wider sphere of teaching our children emotions, and or maybe not teaching them, but actually labeling what those emotions are and be able to articulate them.
Yeah, showing them.
Absolutely. Well, I have to say that I think that if you're working with children, it's an absolutely essential skill. And the learning is so important when working with them because it's so different to working with adults, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes, it is. I think when you do bereavement work, you need to really take on board the whole family because, and I say this in the lecture, that not to assume that you're seeing a child because they're sad that their grandma died, for example. It could be the dynamics of the bereavements caused within the family, and it's sort of taking on a whole family approach when you're working out what support the child needs.
Well, I think on that note, those very wise words, Nicola, I think there's a lot of food for thought there, and I think if you are listening to this and you're working with children, it may be worth thinking about what the wider family system is and maybe how you can support them. It's a fabulous lecture. I've watched it myself, and
thank you.
Very, very incisive and useful. Absolutely essential if you're a child therapist. So, Nicola Hughes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Big thank you to Nicola Hughes and to you, Rory, for bringing us that information. It's different, isn't it? How it is perceived from a child's perspective. I mean, even if we've kind of done training on working with loss and grief, it's that step further, and I think it's very niche.
I would absolutely agree with you, Ken, and I think a lot of children can be spared. I'm going to use the word a lot of extra grief if they have an adult that understands them and understands the way they process loss. And Nicola, in the podcast, she articulated it very well. In the lecture, she really does a deep dive into this and really makes it absolutely clear what we have to think about if we are sensitively supporting a child who is experienced loss. And it really is a skill. When I did a bereavement course and a child and adolescent course a few years ago, really opened my eyes, and it really did change my practice, but it also informed me what I had to do and be thoughtful of if I ever met a child in any other walk of life who was known to me who'd lost a parent.
Yeah.
So I think it's essential. I think if you're a parent, or anybody who has any kind of contact with children, it's a must listen to, Ken.
Yeah, I agree with you. And of course, we say this so often. If you've listened to our podcast and you've heard us say this before, CPD is so important, not just so we can write it down and submit it to our ethical body and say, look, I've done my CPD. What CPD does is it sharpens your competence. And something you said, Rory, many, many years ago, and I remember it because I trained under Rory, and I remember this from when I was training to become a counsellor under Rory. You said that a client can only go as far as the counsellor is able to go. We are there with the client, but if we have no information or misinformation about an area, we can't go into that area confidently with the client. It's about how deep we can go. So sharpening your competence just gives you that narrowness to penetrate deeper in. And if you are in a situation where you come across, like you said, Rory, where this comes up in a session, it's almost too late if it comes up right there and then. You can't go, hold on a minute, I'm just going to run off and do the CPD. By sharpening our competence, it just allows us to better serve our clients. And I think that speaking to so many of the people who listen to this podcast, people that are in our Facebook group, we all came into this to make that difference. That's what it's all about. If you're interested in sharpening your competence, you want to listen to Nicola Hughes's full lecture, and it really is incredible. You can do that by going to counsellingtutor.com. We have a CPD library for a very low cost. For as little as just £15, you can unlock hours and hours and hours of professional CPD for counsellors. Those CPD hours carry a certificate to evidence them, which is accepted by the UK awarding body. So if you're in the BACP or the National Counselling Society or any of the others, that is accepted as CPD. Plus, it gives you the sharpened competence to be able to be there and better serve your clients. Wow.
Well, what a podcast, if I do say so myself. So we started off by practicing skills online, a discipline that I'm afraid that lots of students were going to have to attain in this COVID practicing environment. In the middle, we looked at contracting in online therapy. There is a handout for that. If you go to podcast 164, go to counsellingtutor.com, look at the podcast tabs. Look at podcast 164. There's a handout waiting for you, specific areas of contracting in online counselling, just an overview. And then we ended with a interview with the fab Nicola Hughes, who gave us an insight into child loss. And as always, stay grounded, stay safe, and join the digital revolution.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.